What if Chidi wasn't interested in men? What if this whole thing was a disaster waiting to happen? As much as Tunda wanted to express his feelings, he couldn't shake the fear that things would end badly. Tunda had always been an ordinary young man living in the bustling city of Lagos. His days were filled with the familiar routines of work, hanging out with friends, and attending family gatherings. But something had been stirring inside him, a feeling he could not fully understand or express. One sunny afternoon, while browsing the aisles of a local grocery store, everything changed. That's when he first laid eyes on Chidi, his neighbor from down the street. Chidi wasn't just another person in the crowd. He stood out to Tunda. Tall, charismatic, and confident, Chidi exuded a charm that left Tunda completely mesmerized. As Chidi reached for an item on the top shelf, Tunda felt his heart race. The attraction was undeniable, but it brought with it a confusion that clouded his thoughts. How could he feel this way about another man? Tunda wasn't sure what these emotions meant or how to act on them. But one thing was clear. He had to meet Chidi, to speak to him, even if it was just to break the ice. It was a bold step, and Tunda knew he couldn't hold back any longer. After a few deep breaths, Tunda gathered his courage and walked over to Chidi. His palms were sweaty, and his heart pounded in his chest, but he managed to introduce himself. "Hi, I'm Tunde. I've seen you around. You're my neighbor, right?" Chidi looked up, smiled warmly, and responded, "Yeah, I've seen you too. Nice to finally meet you." For a moment, Tunde's nerves settled, soothed by Chidi's friendliness. But behind his easy smile, Tunde's mind was racing. He had never felt so drawn to someone before, and the intensity of his feelings made him uneasy. As they exchanged pleasantries, Tunde fought to keep his composure. Part of him wanted to express the flood of emotions he was experiencing, but another part told him to hold back. After all, how could he possibly explain what was going on in his head? He had no roadmap for this kind of attraction, no example to follow, so he kept the conversation light. And before he knew it, Chidi was waving goodbye, leaving Tunde standing alone in the grocery aisle, his feelings unresolved. After the encounter at the grocery store, Tunde couldn't stop thinking about Chidi. His mind replayed the scene over and over, analyzing every word, every smile. Was Chidi just being friendly? Or did he sense Tunde's attraction? Did he feel something too? These thoughts consumed Tunde as he lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling. He had never felt this way before. Confused, excited, and terrified all at once. Days passed, and Tunde found himself watching for any sign of Chidi. He would walk by Chidi's house on his way to work, hoping for a glimpse of him. Every time he saw Chidi from afar, his heart would skip a beat. Tunde began to realize that he wasn't just physically attracted to Chidi. He wanted to get to know him better, to be closer to him. But how could he bridge the gap between friendly neighbor and something more? The thought of confessing his feelings terrified him, but keeping them hidden felt like an impossible burden. Unable to shake his growing feelings, Tunde decided to take small steps to get closer to Chidi. He started by offering to help with little things, like carrying groceries or helping with household tasks. One afternoon, as they both arrived home at the same time, Tunde casually offered to carry Chidi's bags. Chidi smiled and accepted the offer, thanking him with that same warm friendliness that always made Tunde's heart race. The more time Tunde spent around Chidi, the more his attraction deepened. He found himself laughing at Chidi's jokes, enjoying the way he carried himself with confidence and ease. But despite these small interactions, Tunde could never bring himself to say what he truly felt. He feared that speaking the truth would ruin everything, and so he continued to hide behind casual conversation and small gestures, hoping that Chidi might somehow sense his deeper emotions. As weeks passed, Tunde found himself increasingly torn between his growing affection for Chidi and the fear of rejection. It wasn't just about whether Chidi would return his feelings. Tunde was grappling with his own identity. He had never considered himself to be anything but a regular guy. The idea of being attracted to another man was new, unsettling, and something he wasn't sure how to process. Each time he saw Chidi, the conflict within him intensified. Part of Tunde wanted to push these feelings aside, to return to the familiar safety of his previous life. But another part of him knew that suppressing these emotions wouldn't make them go away. The more he tried to deny them, the stronger they became. It was becoming harder and harder to keep his true feelings a secret. In an attempt to spend more time with Chidi, Tunde decided to invite him to a local event, a community concert that was happening over the weekend. With his heart pounding in his chest, Tunde knocked on Chidi's door and extended the invitation. "Hey, I was wondering if you'd like to come to this concert with me on Saturday. It should be fun." Chidi hesitated for a moment, but then smiled and agreed. "Sure, why not? Sounds like a good time." Tunde could hardly believe his luck. Chidi had said yes. For the rest of the week, Tunde's anticipation grew. He couldn't wait to spend more time with Chidi, to get to know him better, and maybe, just maybe, find the right moment to confess his feelings. But even as excitement bubbled inside him, Tunde couldn't shake the nagging doubt that this might not go the way he hoped. The night of the concert arrived, and Tunde was a bundle of nerves. He had spent the entire day overthinking every possible outcome of the evening. What if Chidi picked up on his feelings? What if he reacted badly? Or worse, what if Chidi had absolutely no idea how much Tunde liked him? As he stood outside waiting for Chidi to join him, Tunde tried to steady his nerves. This was just a concert, he reminded himself. No need to complicate things. When Chidi finally arrived, Tunde couldn't help but smile. Dressed casually, but still looking effortlessly handsome, Chidi greeted Tunde with a grin. "You ready for this?" Chidi asked, and Tunde nodded, his heart racing. As they walked to the concert together, Tunde tried to keep the conversation light, but his mind was elsewhere. Every glance from Chidi, every laugh they shared, made his feelings grow stronger. By the time they arrived at the concert, Tunde realized something important. He couldn't keep hiding how he felt forever. The concert was lively, with music filling the air and people dancing around them. Tunde and Chidi stood among the crowd, enjoying the performance. But Tunde's mind was far from the music. Every now and then, Chidi would brush against him or lean in to say something, and Tunde's heart would flutter. He kept telling himself that this was the perfect moment to confess his feelings, to finally get the weight off his chest. But as the night wore on, Tunde couldn't bring himself to say the words. Every time he thought he was ready, fear held him back. What if Chidi didn't feel the same? What if this ruined their budding friendship? Tunde realized that he was at a crossroads. But for now, he chose the safer path of silence. As they walked home after the concert, Tunde knew he had missed his chance. Again. But the fear of rejection weighed too heavily on his heart. Over the next few days, the tension between Tunde and his own emotions only grew. His friendship with Chidi had become more comfortable, but underneath the surface, Tunde's feelings continued to churn. Every time they hung out, Every time Chidi flashed that easy smile, Tunde's attraction deepened. But the longer he waited to speak, the more anxious he became about what might happen if Chidi found out how he truly felt. Tunde started to wonder if Chidi had noticed anything. Could he sense the way Tunde lingered just a little too long during their conversations? Did he see the way Tunde's eyes would light up whenever he was around? It became harder and harder to keep up the act, to pretend that his feelings were nothing more than simple friendship. Tunde knew that eventually, something would have to give. Tunde found himself at a crossroads. His emotions were becoming too intense to ignore, but the fear of rejection kept him paralyzed. What if Chidi wasn't interested in men? What if this whole thing was a disaster waiting to happen? As much as Tunde wanted to express his feelings, he couldn't shake the fear that things would end badly. He decided to confide in his close friend Ayo one evening over a few drinks. Ayo had always been understanding, and Tunde knew he could trust him with this secret. "There's this guy," Tunde started, feeling the weight of the confession. "He's our neighbor, Chidi. I like him. But I don't know what to do about it." Ayo listened carefully, offering his support. "Man, that's tough. But you can't keep this to yourself forever. You either tell him, or you'll be stuck wondering what if for the rest of your life." Ayo's words stuck with Tunde for days. He knew his friend was right. Living with this secret was becoming unbearable, and the longer he waited, the harder it would be to confront Chidi. Tunde spent hours replaying every moment they had shared, wondering if there had been any hint, any sign that Chidi might feel the same way. But no matter how hard he tried, Tunde couldn't be sure. Finally, Tunde made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this. He had to tell Chidi how he felt, even if it meant risking everything. It was the only way to move forward, to get closure, or perhaps even open the door to something more. Tunde rehearsed the words in his head, trying to find the perfect way to express his feelings without making things awkward or uncomfortable. It was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done, but he knew it had to be done. On a quiet evening, Tunde invited Chidi over under the pretense of watching a movie together. As they sat on the couch, Tunde could barely focus on the film. His heart was pounding, and the words he had rehearsed over and over were stuck in his throat. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Tunde couldn't take it anymore. He paused the movie and turned to Chidi. "Chidi, I need to talk to you about something," Tunde began, his voice shaky. Chidi looked over, his expression curious but relaxed. Tunde took a deep breath. "I don't know how to say this, but I like you. I've liked you for a while now, and I've been afraid to tell you because I didn't know how you'd react." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Chidi's smile faded, replaced by a look of surprise and confusion. Chidi's reaction wasn't what Tunde had hoped for. His expression shifted from surprise to discomfort, and Tunde could see the tension in his body language. "Tunde, I don't know what to say," Chidi began, his voice careful. "I appreciate you being honest with me, but I'm not into guys. I had no idea you felt this way, and I'm sorry if I ever gave you the wrong impression." Tunde's heart sank. He had expected rejection, but hearing the words still hurt more than he anticipated. Chidi continued, his tone growing more serious. "I think you're a great guy, Tunde, but this isn't something I'm comfortable with. I hope we can still be friends, but I need you to understand that this isn't going to happen." The rejection hit Tunde hard. He had braced himself for the possibility, but the reality of it was far more painful than he had imagined. Chidi's words echoed in his mind, leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable. After Chidi left that evening, Tunde sat alone in his apartment, replaying the conversation over and over. He couldn't believe that he had finally mustered the courage to confess his feelings, only to be met with rejection. For days, Tunde withdrew into himself, avoiding Chidi and struggling with the aftermath of his failed confession. The pain of rejection was compounded by the fear that he had ruined their friendship for good. He had taken a risk, but now he was left wondering if it had been worth it. In the days following his confession, Tunde found it increasingly difficult to maintain his composure. Every time he saw Chidi around the neighborhood, he felt a pang of regret and awkwardness. Chidi had been polite enough, but the distance between them was undeniable. What was once an easy friendship now felt strained, filled with an uncomfortable silence that neither of them dared to address. Tunde did his best to avoid crossing paths with Chidi, but in a small, bustling neighborhood, that wasn't always possible. He would spot Chidi from a distance, chatting with other neighbors or running errands, and each time, Tunde felt a sharp ache in his chest. How could something that had seemed so promising now feel like an unbearable weight? He missed the way things used to be, but he knew that nothing could ever go back to normal. Feeling lost, Tunde sought solace in his friend Ayo once again. One evening, they met up for drinks at a local bar, and Tunde poured out his heart. "I told him Ayo," Tunde said, staring at his drink. "I told Chidi how I felt, and he rejected me. He said he's not into guys and didn't know I felt that way." Ayo listened quietly, giving Tunde the space to vent his frustration and pain. "That's rough, man," Ayo finally said. "But at least you told him. You were brave enough to be honest with yourself and with him. Not everyone can do that." Tunde nodded, but the words didn't bring much comfort. "I just don't know how to move on from this. I feel like I've messed everything up, and now I've lost him as a friend too." Ayo offered a sympathetic smile. "It'll take time, but you've taken the first step. Now it's about figuring out how to move forward, whether that's healing on your own or finding a way to rebuild the friendship." Over the next few weeks, Tunde spent a lot of time reflecting on his life and his feelings. The rejection had forced him to confront not just his unrequited love for Chidi, but also his own identity. For the first time, Tunde allowed himself to fully acknowledge his attraction to men, something he had never been able to put into words before. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed by confusion and shame, but he knew he couldn't keep running from himself. Tunde began to see that Chidi's rejection, painful as it was, had pushed him toward a deeper understanding of who he really was. He realized that his feelings for Chidi were just a small part of a much larger journey, one that involved accepting himself, no matter how difficult that might be. It was a long, winding road, but Tunde knew that he had to walk it, even if he had to do it alone. As time passed, Tunde found himself slowly coming to terms with the situation. He and Chidi had continued to maintain a polite distance, but one evening, as Tunde was coming home from work, he unexpectedly ran into Chidi on the street. There was an awkward pause, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. Chidi was the first to break the silence. "Hey Tunde, we haven't talked in a while. How have you been?" His tone was casual, but there was an underlying sincerity that Tunde hadn't expected. Tunde hesitated before responding. "I've been okay. You?" Chidi nodded, and for the first time in weeks, they exchanged a few more words. It wasn't the easygoing banter they used to share, but it was a step toward rebuilding some form of connection. As they parted ways, Tunde realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to be friends again. But this time, it would be on new terms, and Tunde knew he had to be okay with that. Tunde began to focus on rebuilding his life, accepting that his romantic hopes for Chidi were over. The process wasn't easy. He still had moments of sadness and regret. But he was slowly learning to accept that not every story ends in a happy romance. Sometimes, the real journey is the one of self-discovery. He started to focus on the things that made him happy outside of his feelings for Chidi. His job, his hobbies, and spending time with friends like Ayo, who had supported him through it all. Tunde also realized that part of moving forward meant accepting that his feelings for Chidi had been one-sided. It wasn't Chidi's fault for not feeling the same way, and it wasn't a reflection of Tunde's worth. He had to learn to face that reality, as painful as it was, and let it go. As Tunde continued to grow more comfortable with himself, he began to notice that the world felt a little different. The fear and anxiety that had once clouded his every thought was starting to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Tunde wasn't completely healed, but he was on his way. He realized that accepting himself was the first step in opening up to new possibilities in life and love. One evening, as he walked home from work, Tunde spotted someone new moving into an apartment across the street. A young man around his age was unloading boxes from a car, and their eyes met briefly as Tunde walked by. The stranger smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Tunde felt a flicker of curiosity and hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was a new beginning. He didn't know what the future held, but Tunde was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. The man across the street, whose name Tunde later learned was Femi, seemed friendly and approachable. Over the next few days, they exchanged brief greetings, and Tunde found himself thinking about Femi more often than he expected. It wasn't the intense attraction he had felt for Chidi, but there was something calming about Femi's presence. One afternoon, as Tunde walked past, Femi waved him over. "Hey, I've seen you around," Femi said with a smile. "I'm Femi, just moved in a few days ago. You live around here?" Tunde introduced himself, and soon they were chatting about the neighborhood, their jobs, and the best local restaurants. It felt easy, natural. Unlike the nervousness Tunde had experienced with Chidi, this conversation flowed effortlessly. Tunde realized that maybe he was ready to start making new connections, to let go of the past and move forward. As Tunde got to know Femi better, they started hanging out more often, grabbing coffee, taking walks, or just chatting outside their apartments. Femi's easygoing nature put Tunde at ease, but he couldn't help feeling a slight hesitation. After everything that had happened with Chidi, Tunde was afraid of putting himself out there again. What if this went wrong too? What if Femi didn't feel the same way? One evening, after spending hours talking and laughing, Tunde found himself thinking about his past with Chidi. Would this end the same way? Could he really open himself up again after such a painful rejection? But as he watched Femi laugh at one of his jokes, Tunde realized something important. He didn't have to rush. He could take his time and let things unfold naturally, without the pressure of his past hanging over him. Tunde confided in Ayo once again, this time about his growing friendship with Femi. "I'm not sure what this is," Tunde said one evening over drinks. "I mean, I like Femi, but I'm afraid of getting hurt again. What if this is another Chidi situation?" Ayo listened patiently, offering a supportive smile. "Look, I get it. What happened with Chidi was tough, But not every situation is going to be like that. You've learned a lot about yourself since then, and you've grown. Take things slow with Femi. You don't have to figure everything out right away. Just enjoy getting to know him and see where it goes. Tunde nodded, appreciating Ayo's wisdom. He knew Ayo was right. There was no need to rush into anything, but at the same time, Tunde felt a cautious optimism he hadn't experienced in a while. Maybe this time, things could be different. As the weeks went by, Tunde and Femi grew closer. They shared stories about their lives, their families, and their dreams for the future. Tunde found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, and Femi was always there to listen, offering his own stories in return. It was during one of these quiet moments, sitting together at a local cafe, that Tunde realized just how much he enjoyed Femi's company. There was no rush to define what they had, no pressure to put a label on their relationship. They were just two people enjoying each other's presence, and for the first time in a long while, Tunde felt content. He hadn't expected to meet someone like Femi, and yet, here they were, building something new and unexpected. One evening, as they walked home from a local event, Femi casually placed his hand on Tunde's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but Tunde felt a surge of warmth spread through him. Femi didn't pull away, and neither did Tunde. It was in that moment that Tunde realized there might be more to this friendship than he had initially thought. Later that night, as Tunde replayed the evening in his mind, he couldn't help but smile. He was still cautious, but the possibility of something more with Femi excited him. Maybe this wasn't going to be another story of unrequited love. Maybe this time, things could work out. One quiet evening, as they sat on the steps outside their building, Femi broke the comfortable silence between them. "Tunde, can I ask you something?" Femi's voice was soft, serious. Tunde nodded, sensing that something important was about to be said. Femi hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I don't want to make things weird, but I think I like you, more than just as a friend." Tunde's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, but he hadn't expected Femi to be the one to take the first step. A rush of emotions filled him. Excitement, relief, and a hint of fear. But most of all, Tunde felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had spent so much time doubting himself, worrying about rejection, and now here was Femi, opening up to him in the way he had once longed for Chidi to do. Tunde smiled, feeling the weight of his past fears begin to lift. "I like you too, Femi," he admitted. "I've been afraid to say anything because of, well, what happened before. But I don't want to rush into anything. I think we should just take things slow and see where this goes." Femi nodded, his own smile spreading across his face. "I'm good with that. We don't have to rush. Let's just enjoy this." And with that, they both relaxed into the moment, knowing that they were on the same page. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, but it was the start of something real, something genuine. Over the next few weeks, Tunde and Femi began to explore their relationship at a pace that felt comfortable for both of them. They went on casual dates, spent time getting to know each other on a deeper level, and built a foundation based on trust and mutual respect. Tunde couldn't help but reflect on how different this felt from his experience with Chidi. This time, there was no hidden tension, no unspoken fears. With Femi, everything felt open and honest. Though Tunde occasionally thought about Chidi and the pain of that rejection, he realized that it no longer held power over him. He had learned from the experience, And now he was ready to move forward with Femi. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about embracing the future with someone who saw him for who he truly was. Tunde found himself growing more confident, not just in his relationship with Femi, but in his sense of self. He had come a long way from the uncertainty and fear that had once dominated his thoughts. Now he was learning to trust his own feelings and to communicate openly with the people who mattered to him. One evening, as he and Femi sat together on Tunde's balcony, watching the sunset over the city, Tunde realized how far he had come. This wasn't just about finding love, it was about finding himself. For the first time in his life, Tunde felt truly comfortable in his own skin. And that was the greatest gift of all. As Tunde looked back on the journey he had been through, he knew that it had been full of ups and downs, heartbreak and healing. But in the end, it had led him to this moment, a place of peace and acceptance, both with himself and with Femi. Tunde knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them, knowing that he had grown stronger through the experience. He had discovered that love wasn't always easy, and it didn't always come in the way you expected. But it was worth the risk, the vulnerability, and the courage to keep moving forward. And as Tunde sat beside Femi, their hands intertwined, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future.